Welcome to 06880, the podcast. This is not CNN, but that's where today's guest is from. Alisyn Camerota is a journalist, author, and CNN correspondent. She's anchored the morning show New Day, co-hosted the afternoon edition of CNN Newsroom, and hosted CNN Tonight. Before CNN, Alisyn worked at Fox News. She has won 2 Emmys and the Edward R. Murrow Award. Very impressive. Her first novel, Amanda Wakes Up, was chosen by NPR as one of the best books of the year. And her new book, Combat Love, will be published later this month. Alisyn is equally notably a Westport resident and very active in our community. Welcome to 06880, the podcast.
I'm honored, Dan. Thank you for having me.
This is low rent. I don't have a teleprompter or anything like that. So thank you for making...
How can you do it without a teleprompter? That shows how talented you are, Dan.
making time for this little broadcast. Thanks. So I want to talk about 3 things.
Okay.
Your career, your new book, and Westport.
Great.
And start with TV. So you've done morning, afternoon, evening. Which do you love and which do you love less?
Well, mornings are the biggest butt kicker for me. I mean, mornings, I did it for 7 years, almost 7 years at CNN, and it was a great show. You know, I really enjoyed the show. We were I felt relevant. We did, I think, pretty memorable interviews. I enjoyed working with my co-hosts, but the 3 a.m. alarm every morning, I never got used to it. People would say to me, oh, surely you're used to it by now. I was like, nope, it's a surprise every morning. Every morning when that thing would go off, I'd be like, what is that sound? Oh my God, what's that racket? Oh, I have to get up now. So I never got used to it. It was physically grueling to do the mornings, even though when the red light would go on, it was a pleasure to be on it. So the afternoons were much.
Did you have a driver?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had a driver. And thank God I had a driver because that was one of my busiest times. The hour from 3:45 to 4:45 in the morning was one of the most hectic cramming for the exam times. That's when I would be going back and forth with my producer. We would be pulling sound bites. We would be, designing graphics. I would be fact checking. I'd be reading every article. And it's hard to do that with 3:30 a.m. brain, So it was often like a white knuckle ride for me. People would often say, gosh, how do you do it? It seems so flawless. I had my notes. Like I clung to my notes. I would write my notes at 4 a.m. and just have them there as my security blanket, So it was hard. And I never missed the alarm going off, ever when I said goodbye to that. I did the 2 to 4 afternoon show, which was a delight. I loved it. I loved my co-host, Victor Blackwell. We had a great time. And then I was excited for the new adventure of doing primetime, which is a different beast. I was a solo anchor for that one. That was a different skill set. I like all of it. I really like all of it. I like I like doing interviews. I like the storytelling. I like being able to be a conduit for information for the viewers.
And you've done some big stories. You did the Paris bombings. You did the Parkland shootings, interviewing, including some of the survivors and NRA people. What stands out from, the journalistic side of things?
Sadly, I've done more school shootings than I can count. Wow. I mean, I've been reporting on school shootings since Columbine. And Parkland does stand out because that was the first time that I flew there that night. The next morning at 6 a.m., I was live on the air. We might even have gone on at 5 because of that. In any event, I was on at 6 a.m. and David Hogg, who's become, one of the faces.
He's one of my heroes.
Me too. He was riding his bike up and sort of looking around, and I flagged him. I believe we were his first national interview. Wow. And already at 6:30 in the morning, or whenever that happened, 7 a.m., I already knew that we were looking at something totally different with Parkland than any of the school shootings I had reported on before, because somehow, I don't know how, those kids were already in action. The kids who survived were already yelling at the lawmakers, telling them this time was going to be different, saying we're going to take back our schools, marching on the Capitol, already planning it. And I hadn't seen anything like that. So
some of them had been involved in a media production class or something like
David
that,
Hogg.
right?
David Hogg had been. So maybe we can credit it with that. I mean, they already were, even in their grief, I mean, even in their shock, they were still shell-shocked. They were already making plans for what they were going to do. And by God, those kids have changed the laws in Florida. And this whole stuff with the NRA and Wayne LaPierre, they were the kids. It was them who flagged, I can't even remember which DA or attorney general, maybe in New York, that something fishy was going on. And sure enough, this week or last week, Wayne LaPierre is under investigation and, is in trouble because they flagged it. So, and
because you gave them the platform.
Thank you, Dan. I'm the real hero here. I'm glad that you're recognizing that. I know, because I am there to be the conduit for that kind of energy and that kind of passion. And I was just really honored, particularly with the Parkland kids, to be watching them and helping them. Yeah.
And boy, I've followed David Hogg's career since then through Harvard and what he's doing now. And he's taken some hits. There are people who accuse him of, doing this for his own benefit. And
it's vile. Marjorie Taylor Greene chased after him and was yelling at him, yelling names at him, chasing him around Capitol Hill. At some point, somebody has to remind her, this is a school shooting survivor that you're traumatizing with calling him names and harassment. I mean, he really has developed the strongest of spines. At times when I've talked to him many times and been with him many times, and I've had to say to him, is everything okay? Are you taking care of yourself? Yeah. What are you doing to take care of yourself? Because that bright light and that platform he steps into, willingly. But of course, all of it takes an emotional toll.
But that's the side of journalism that I think a lot of people don't see, which is that journalists are human too, and you're thinking of, that side of things.
Yeah, I think that we also, there's a kind of trauma residue that journalists have begun talking about that I don't feel that way because I'm not a war correspondent. The people who go into war zones, my colleagues who are so brave, Clarissa Ward, I mean, obviously I could, Nick Payton Walsh, I could go down the list of people. I don't know how they do it because they're immersed and they're in danger. I don't often feel in danger. There are times that I've had some dicey assignments, but I'm not living with bombs, going off near me. And so we've just begun talking about that of, journalists having to do kind of a decompression period and a detox period for how to, get through some of that stuff.
And then the photojournalists, the Westporters, Lindsay Addario and Darcy Hicks, or not Darcy, her brother Tyler.
Yeah, they're amazing. Yeah. Amazing. I don't know how they do it. That takes like I said, steel spine that, I don't think anybody wants me in a war zone. I'm helpful in some places, but that's not one of them. And so I do much better in sort of, like, I'm not proud of it. I wish I never have to cover another school shooting, but I know how to do it because I know how to compartmentalize that level of pain to be able to go and interview those grieving families. Yeah, I mean, it is awful, but I do want to give them a platform because they're the ones who know how much has to change.
Other stories that stand out?
There's a lot of stories that stand out. I mean, it depends on if you want some of the really happy ones or the traumatic ones. I guess I'll give you both. One of my biggest learning training grounds, was when I worked at America's Most Wanted, the crime show. And I loved that job. I was a reporter there, and it taught me the power of television in a way that nothing else ever has. The power of TV. The FBI or the local sheriff would have looked for somebody for 5, 10, 15 years. They'd be on the FBI Most Wanted list, and we would put that person on the air, and that night he'd be captured. Because the power of TV, when you engage the viewers and you have all those eyeballs looking, and like being able to give justice to those families who had waited all of those years to adjudicate their daughter's murder or their son's murder. It was so rewarding. It was so rewarding and so powerful. So that was a really special time. And it taught me, I mean, I was young. I was 25. and it taught me the power of TV, and I've never forgotten it. It's still a powerful medium, less so because obviously social media, the advent of all of the new technologies, but those eyeballs, if you harness them for good, it goes a long way.
But what a responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that can be abused.
For sure. For sure. And we learned that at America's Most Wanted, too, because we knew that we would capture these guys. We were so powerful, we had to make sure that all of our facts were completely tied up because we were bringing somebody back to either a life in prison or sometimes the death penalty. And if we didn't believe what the police were telling us, or we thought there was a hole in some story, or we didn't have all of our facts buttoned up, we didn't do it because it just wasn't worth. We knew we would capture somebody, and it wasn't worth putting them to on trial for the death penalty unless we were right.
So the two cable networks, Fox and CNN, pretty different to an outsider like me.
Yeah.
Different to you as well?
Yeah, I think they're night and day. Fox, it's no secret, was started by a Republican operative named Roger Ailes. He wasn't a journalist. I no longer even know if he knew the rules of journalism. He knew ratings.
And he knew them well.
He knew them well, and he knew how to win. He was very, very, I had many, many, many times in Roger's office, and he talked about winning. He never once talked about journalism. And he wanted to win, and he was very good at television. Television is different than journalism. And so CNN has been led by top-notch journalists who, there are rules of journalism, and you must follow those rules of journalism, and you must make sure that your facts are straight. You must make sure that your sources are solid. You must make sure that if you ever make a mistake, and we're all fallible, we're human, you admit that to your viewers. You own up to that. You apologize for that. You make it right. Roger didn't follow any of those. And by the way, the reason that Fox was sued for $787 million successfully, and they had to settle, was because they didn't use solid sources. They used crackpots. You don't put crackpots on the air. You can put somebody on the air who has a strong opinion, and you can even put somebody on the air who's wrong. But if you know they're wrong, you stop them and say, I'm sorry, no facts support what you're saying. CNN cannot confirm what you've just said on the air. We have to do that all the time. Fox doesn't do that. They let Sidney Powell, they let Rudy Giuliani say whatever he wanted to say, and they got in big trouble. That's just one example. They're often in trouble because they're masquerading as a news channel, but they're not following the rules of news.
So how does that make you and your colleagues feel?
Well, now it makes me feel horrible. It makes me feel horrible because I think they've done real damage, and I think it's a really dangerous time to be blurring the lines. I think the fact that they've been masquerading as a news program and they spout unfactual, fact-free narratives is really dangerous, and I think it's gotten us into this time, this kind of anti-truth time that we're living in. I think Fox really paved the way for that, and it's really dangerous as we've seen. Let's take it to its extreme. When you tell your viewers something that's not true and they believe it, sometimes hundreds of them show up en masse at the U.S. Capitol and try to overthrow an election because they believe that the election was stolen because you haven't stopped your crackpot guests from spewing lies. And there are dozens, maybe hundreds of people who have been now charged and prosecuted, and at least dozens in jail because they fell. They're gullible and they fell for
Hundreds.
that. Yeah, I don't know if they're all in jail, but they certainly were prosecuted.
Yeah.
And so that's the danger personally of falling for lies. And then, of course, there's the larger danger of the country.
And yet I think CNN and MSNBC and Fox are now sort of seen as, together, the media. And there's a lot of media bashing going on.
Yeah, I draw a distinction between the media, which can be Fox or Entertainment Tonight or Instagram, and the press. There is I think, bright line between the media and the press, but that's because I went to school to become a journalist and I know the rules. And so everybody, I agree, everybody needs media literacy and, news literacy, because I don't expect regular Americans to know exactly what the rules of journalism are. Like, we used to take it for granted that they knew it, and Americans took it for granted that the three newscasts at night, ABC and NBC and CBS, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, were telling them the truth. You took it for granted that Ted Koppel or Peter Jennings were doing their best to tell you the truth. But obviously, everything has gotten so blurred. And again, I think that Fox is part of the reason for that. I think people are very confused, particularly in this information from a fire hose moment. And it's a real crying shame. I try to help people become literate. I do volunteer work for the News Literacy Project that goes into schools and tries to help high schoolers and grammar schoolers understand what the First Amendment is and what freedom of the press is and what the press is. But it is really hard right now.
So how worried should we be as we head into the election?
I'd say petrified.
Okay. I'm with you.
I mean, I'd say petrified.
I'm with you.
I'd like to sugarcoat it, but I can't, because I think that people are so confused about what the truth is, and they don't know what a really legitimate news organization is anymore. I think that Donald Trump did a good job of trying to besmirch CNN, though we continue to follow the rules of journalism and truth. And I am quite worried. I mean, Donald Trump has been quite overt what he would do to journalists if he's elected again, and his dictatorial instincts and how he would try to gain more power since he learned from the last time. I just think people should pay attention to the stakes.
Sounds like a great book. Is that your next one?
Well, I do feel that. I mean, my first one, Amanda Wakes Up, was about cable news, and it was about my experience in cable news.
It was a novel.
It was a novel. I would call it lightly fictionalized.
Okay.
Because I did draw from my own experience. So I do, in there, you get my philosophy on news and on the press in Amanda Wakes Up. Yeah, so I don't know. I take your point. I'll start working on another book. Thanks, Dan.
Go for it. Why not? You don't have to get up at 3 a.m. anymore.
You're right. You're right. I can do anything now.
Combat Love. Very different.
Yeah.
Very different. It's memoir. About rock and roll.
Yes, I mean it's sort of. I mean, it's about certainly the power of music and the power that music had in my life. I love music, and tragically, I have no talent in that arena. I can't play guitar. I can't sing. So I just am so moved by music that it's definitely a motif through the book. But it's also about the free-range 80s and how much music meant to all of us back then. I was obsessed with a band in it called Shrapnel that I followed around into all sorts of dicey... Yeah, a punk band, a local punk band from New Jersey. I was young. I was madly in love with them. I followed them into all sorts of dangerous situations, which they were not happy about, that a little teeny bopper kept following them around. And I mean, it's about... So that's one level of what it's about. And I hope that everybody will enjoy the story, particularly Gen Xers who remember our free-range youth in the 80s and the music of the 80s. And then on a deeper level, it's also about, struggling to find my ballast. And I think some of the grit that I developed my teenage years that did help me become a journalist, and some of the painful, hard, scary episodes that I lived through. And so I think that it's also at a deeper level about survival. And I hope that people can also get something out of that, I survived some stuff and some mental health challenges, and I went on to have this wonderful life. So I hope that it's an inspiration for people.
It's great. And you really are, it's what a memoir should be, which is honest and insightful and no holds barred. But I was really struck by you call it the free range upbringing that you had. And I had, decade or two earlier growing up here in Westport. And now you got kids, you're raising kids in Westport, and this is not a free range community.
Nowhere in this country is free range anymore. I mean, very, very few pockets. And I'm not happy about it. I don't like that the pendulum has swung from free range to helicopter parents in one generation. I I don't like that. I don't think we're doing them any favors. There has to be a happy medium. I mean, could I have used a few more guardrails? Okay, sure. But do we need to micromanage and monitor our kids' every movement? No, we don't. And I think that I worry that we're crippling them a bit because they really aren't as self-sufficient as we were. There has to be a happy medium. I think the helicopter parenting era will not be looked back on kindly because I was sharing this feeling with a contemporary, a guy who's a producer, and he said that he walked into the kitchen the other day and saw his son, who's a teenager, standing in front of the toaster looking at it, not sure what to do. Like, we have to stop making toast for our kids because we're afraid they'll burn themselves, So we've gone overboard, and I don't like it.
Well, it's beyond helicopter. It's, the snowplow, getting rid of all the obstacles.
And all of the obstacles. It's not good. I mean, my book is a testament to how some obstacles do make you stronger,
So how do you raise your kids in Westport?
A horrible helicopter parent. Because I have no choice. In other words, I've tried to buck the system. I've tried to fight City Hall, okay? But there are stories about like women sending their kids on the train or on the subway alone and like getting arrested. Like, it's a whole era we're living in. Yeah. So I want to leave my kids. I mean, look, my kids are now older teenagers, so right. They can do whatever they want. But when they were
they do.
Yeah, two of them are in college, so they do whatever they want there. One of them is a junior in high school, and I'd say he's kind of a homebody. I mean, he's not going off to CBGBs and seeing a punk rock band right now, And I wish he would on some level. But I guess my point is that I wanted at times when they were adolescents to leave them alone and even leave them alone overnight. And that's just like frowned on right now. So it's really hard to buck the convention of helicoptering.
I was talking to one of the kids that I coached at Staples Soccer and encouraging him with music to go into New York.
Yes.
And he said, I might get lost. I said, it's an island. There's water where you'll eventually hit water. But that's the that's what we're talking about, right?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. I mean, New York is hard to get lost. It's a grid also. It's an island and it's a grid.
Right.
Okay, so, but I think what he means is like, I might be kidnapped or I might get in trouble or something. And I think that, that's obviously a fear. It's impossible to unhear those stories. But at some point, you have to let kids certainly make some mistakes and get a little lost because I don't know how they're going to be self-sufficient adults otherwise.
Well, you and I are on the same page. Yeah. So what got you to Westport?
So we were living in New York and the kids were young. We had 3 kids. And it was time to get our son into preschool. And I find that's often an inflection point because preschool in Manhattan is like getting into Harvard, as you know.
Right.
And so once you get into preschool or you don't get into preschool, well, actually it was kindergarten. He had already gone to preschool in Manhattan. It was kindergarten. And that was like, okay, are we going to be paying 3 private school educations in Manhattan from now through the end of high school and living in a shoebox? By the time that I had 3 kids, I was starting to stack them vertically, like in the bedroom. Like there was a bunk bed and then there was another bed in there for the 3rd child. And I was like, how is this going to work? And I really love a lawn and I love a garage and I love being able to go grocery shopping and bring my bags to my house, all that stuff.
Like you did in New Jersey.
It's very, I mean, I'm a suburban Jersey girl through and through. And so while I love dipping into the city for excitement and adventure, I found it a little too much living there. So I really wanted to move. And I had always heard about Westport. I had a friend when I was a teenager who lived in Westport. I'm sure you know the family, the Weissmans. So
Sure.
Adam Weissman, yeah, of course. So Adam Weissman was kind of an acquaintance or friend, and he lived here. So that seed was already planted in my head. And then my husband's sister married a Westport guy, Alex Sherman, who's also a famous Westport family. And so we just had all roads led to Westport. Okay. And when we visited, this was the town that we agreed on that we could live in.
And did reality match up to the hype, the dream?
Sort of. In ways, yes, and in ways, no. I think that my impression of Westport before I got here was that it was more of like an artist's community, like colony. You know, it was sort of like, I think that some of my impressions were from the 70s and 80s, and that it was kind of a more, groovy macrame center, And like, of course, it's an uber wealthy town.
Right.
But among the uber wealthy towns, I think that it still has that ethos, that kind of middle class sensibility, and the sensibility of more arts, of a more arts community than other places, certainly. So yes and no. I mean, in other words, I'm very happy I live here, but I wouldn't say it exactly matched what my preconception of it was. But now that I live here, I mean, it's hard to imagine ever living anywhere else. Now I have such close friends, and there's such cool people, and there's people doing really interesting things, and I love the beach. So I didn't expect those things, and those have, eclipsed any qualm I would have.
Go-to places. What's your happy places?
The beach. The beach. I mean, that makes Westport really special. I love the beach. I love going to the beach on summer and fall nights and, watching the sunset and hanging out with friends at the beach. I love going there during the day. I love going for walks at the beach. It's just a really Campo Beach is really, really special. That's my favorite place. And then we also go to Earth Place, which is awesome. I mean, a totally different experience. And it's so wonderful to be able to walk the trails and have that accessible.
Really interesting. When I was growing up, the beach was a summer place. It was not a fall, winter, spring place. It was not a place where people walked dogs. It was not a place where people, had a lot of picnics and
Is that
cookouts.
right? So it's just dormant in the other seasons.
Yeah.
Really?
I don't know why, but it has become a 24/7 place.
Yeah, it's really great.
Restaurants?
Okay, my favorite restaurant is Gabriel's. I love it. It's just old school, It's like a delicious filet mignon and delicious like creamed spinach and like they have a potato. They have a baked potato that is bigger than the babies that I birthed. Like it's a hilarious sight gag if you order their baked potato. And they're very old school. Like Danny, who's the owner, and Justin, who's the maitre d', like make you feel so special when you go in and show you your tip. It's really old school glamour to me.
Interesting. I live right by there, and once a night, I can hear the waiters singing "Happy Birthday." I think it's where everybody goes for their birthday.
It is a celebratory place. It's definitely a celebratory place. Yeah.
Any hidden gems that once you reveal them will no longer be hidden?
No, I think that everywhere I know is well known by everybody because it's hard to get a table. All these at my hidden gems, it's hard to get a table. So yeah, no, I don't think I go the same place that everybody else loves.
And you really do feel part of the town. I mean,
yes. I mean, I don't feel as much a part of the fabric as you are because I am still working in New York. So, when you're commuting into the city, it's hard for me to go to sort of daytime things, and at night, sometimes I can't go out. But I definitely walk down the street or drive down the street and see friends and honk at friends and wave and know the different proprietors of different stores and stuff like that. In that way, definitely.
Great.
Yeah.
So we've talked about being fearful or really scared about the upcoming election. Talked about your book, talked about your various gigs at CNN. What's ahead? What's next?
Well, you've tasked me with writing another book. So the book comes out March 26th. So I have a book tour, like the next month we'll be busy with book stuff, which is really fun for me. I like that I'm going to be traveling to LA and around this area, around Connecticut, and doing book stuff. That's a really fun time of publicizing the book. It's hard to know what's next because the world is in such a period of transition. So it's hard to see beyond November. It's hard to see what's going to happen with this election. It's hard to see what's going to happen even in the world of the press and media because so much is changing. I think of AI. I don't think we talk about that enough. I think that a cataclysm is coming. As worried as I am about what the implications and the stakes are for this election, I don't feel we're pumping the brakes enough on AI. I look forward to the good things it will do in medical advances, but I do worry that will strip us of some important level of humanity. And I think we need to be talking about that more and also holding all of these CEO, these tech bosses to task, taking them to task about what's the plan. Are you going to put guardrails up or are we just off to the races?
It is something that I've thought often about, and the law of unintended consequences is really at work here.
For sure. And by the way, it's not that people aren't warning us. The grandfather, I did an interview on CNN tonight with, and I'm forgetting his name right now, but someone who is classified as the grandfather of AI, who is saying, pump the brakes. Like, everybody needs to slow this down. This is dangerous. Like, once this genie's out of the bottle, we're screwed. Like, people are saying it. I just don't know that the tech companies are doing anything.
And that's a great way to end this.
On the apocalypse.
The apocalypse is, and you will be on the air covering the apocalypse.
That's right. Yep. That's right.
And there's no better journalist to do it. So, Alisyn Camerota, thank you for being on 06880, the podcast.
Thanks, Dan. Such an honor.